Hello everyone. Persona 5 Tactica released in November with a pretty weird lead up to release. While properly announced at Summer's Games Fest, it was actually leaked a few days early by Atlus themselves. And if that's not weird enough, they chose to announce that alongside a remake of Persona 3, which obviously got more attention than a spin-off to Persona 5, a game that has already seen plenty of spin-offs. Luckily, I'm a pretty new fan of Persona, having gotten into the series when they went multi-platform last year. So I was still pretty excited for it, a game that mixed together the characters and world of Persona with the gameplay of one of my other favorite game series, Fire Emblem. So once it came out, I played it, and this video will be my full opinion on the game. This will be split into 3 sections. The first will be talking about the main gameplay, the second will be how you build your units to fight, and the third will be about the story. Compared to my other Persona videos, I won't be getting as in-depth into the story, but there still will be spoilers for the entire game, so be warned if you haven't finished it yet. If you liked the video here today, please like and subscribe for more Persona content in the future. Without any further ado, let's talk about Persona 5 Tactica. The strategy gameplay of Persona 5 Tactica is very different than that of Fire Emblem. It's more similar to Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, a game that came out a couple years ago. And to be honest, I think that system works better with Persona than I think the Fire Emblem system would. Obviously, like a lot of other strategy games, you move your units around on a grid. Once all your units move, the enemy gets a chance to move. Persona 5 Tactica system puts a lot of emphasis on cover and elevation. Unit positioning is very important. Having good cover for your allies can mean not being hit at all by enemy attacks, while positioning your units out in the open can get them knocked down by enemies, dealing a lot of damage and giving your enemy an extra turn. If the wrong enemy knocks you down, that could easily kill one of your characters, so you have to make sure that if you can't be in cover, you're in an area where no enemy can easily get you. In my opinion, this is done really well in Tactica. There isn't that many side missions to do outside of the main story, so I appreciate that most of the focus is on putting your units in the right positions, rather than giving them the right skills. Of course, the positioning works both ways. A big part of combat is being able to get your enemies in positions where they can be knocked down by an attack. This, of course, is Tactica's version of the one more system from the base game. Once you knock down an enemy, you can position your units in a triangle shape to do an all-out attack that will decimate anyone that's caught within the triangle. When it comes to combat, each unit has a base melee attack, a range attack, and their Persona abilities. I don't really think I have to break down each unit, as they're all relatively useful. I definitely had my favorites, those being Panther, Noir, and Joker, but all the units were very useful to me. The only one that was kinda disappointing was Makoto. Her Persona abilities draw enemies in, but if they're already in cover, using that ability won't let them be knocked down by another attack. Although she is one of my least favorite units to use in the game, she's also one of the people I use the most, so each unit can be used pretty well. Characters like Morgana and An are much more useful in combat as they have useful healing spells, and you definitely want characters like that in your lineup, because items don't exist in this game, so there's no way to heal without a healer, and Futaba's ability where she can occasionally heal your party isn't very useful, as it doesn't really activate that often, and when it does, the amount of health restored isn't really that great. So again, having a good healer is of the utmost importance this time around. Support skills, on the other hand, I didn't find to be that useful. Since a lot of time in combat your goal is to beat all the enemies, wasting one of your precious turns on buffing another character really didn't seem that useful to me. Especially later in the game when characters would get auto abilities that would start out your characters with a buff. Or you make personas that do the same thing. The biggest attack you can do with a character is a super move. Once your voltage meter charges up fully, you'll launch a sort of super attack that does a variety of things depending on which character you're using it with. All of these abilities range in quality. For a super attack, they honestly aren't that powerful unless you specifically spend skill points on upgrading them, which I never thought was really worth it for any of the characters, since as an attack you have to charge up a meter to, and you get to only use it once for your entire party, and it has to charge up again. I never thought it was really necessary. Now, this totally could just be a me thing, but I found myself only really using An and Joker's attack because it allowed them to act again, which basically just doubled my movement. So yeah, these super attacks really weren't that good for the most part. If they were a tad bit more powerful, I might think differently, but in general, these just weren't awesome. That's pretty much all the major points I want to cover when it comes to combat, but before we move on, let's talk about the map design. When it comes to map variety, Tactica is pretty well off. It never really felt like Tactica was reusing maps that much, and if they did reuse maps, it wasn't as blatant and they'd often have a different map objective. The only times they'd really reuse maps that was obvious is when they'd redo boss fights at the end of the game. I mean, yeah, it's a little dumb that you have to fight the bosses you've already beaten with no real reason for it. It is a little stupid, but I can't really get that mad about this, considering it only happens like 3 maps. The actual quality of the maps are pretty good too. Now, is it one of the best map designs I've seen in a game like this? Absolutely not. Outside of a few, most of the maps in this game are pretty basic, but I don't really think this is a bad thing. Each section of the game will introduce a couple new gameplay features, and they will slowly build on them as you go through the game. Obviously, this is basic game design stuff, so what I said might seem a little bit obvious, but since Tactica's levels aren't really trying to be a part of a living world and it's supposed to be taking place in somebody's head, I think it fits very well. And this means that every mechanic that is introduced is properly developed on. Enemy design is also similarly pretty good. Pretty good is an adequate term to describe all of Persona 5 Tactica's gameplay. It's good and it fits the game well, although I would not call it anything mind-blowing. But, to the game's credit, I don't really think it was ever meant to be. I could definitely dive in deeper and analyze the maps more, but at that point I'd be repeating myself a lot, because a lot of my opinions on these maps and the combat in general is it's good, and I think I want to leave this section on that. But of course, that's only one half of the gameplay, as the other half is building your units to be powerful enough to take on the enemies as efficiently as you can. So now, let's talk about the mechanics behind unit building. Persona 5 Tactica is a game that heavily emphasizes using the right party members for each battle. If a chapter features a lot of enemies on elevated platforms, then bringing someone like Morgana would be smart because Morgana's wind abilities make it easier to knock down enemies. Or maybe if you're positioned below the enemies that are on the platforms, you could bring someone like Makoto, whose nuclear abilities will bring them towards you, knocking them off the platform the same way Morgana would. Since there is not one party member that stands above the rest, it can be hard to know which party members are smart for a specific chapter. Luckily, Tactica makes this a lot easier. With this being an RPG, obviously your teammates will level up. But what's nice about this game is that they all share a level up pool. So instead of having individual levels for each character, the Phantom Thieves all have the same level as each other at all times. This is a really nice feature. Since for the entire game you can only choose 3 party members for each battle, and there are 8 total playable characters, it's nice to know that if you choose not to use someone for a specific chapter, it's not a death sentence from ever using them again. Don't get me wrong, I really do like individual level ups when they show up in other games, but I think Tactica is definitely much better off having a group XP bar, as it greatly simplifies building units, since you no longer have to worry about keeping your units at the same level as each other. There is still a layer of customizability though. For each character there is a skill tree. This is seen in plenty of video games where you have a bunch of skills you can unlock for characters, and as you get points, you can unlock them in any order you want. For each character, there are about 3 major sections you can upgrade in. One section mostly being focused on skills you can use in combat, while the other 2 being more passive, with things like reduced damage and increasing movement. I don't really have too much to add because it's a skill tree, and it's been in plenty of games before, but I will say I do like it. It allows you to have full range of what skills you unlock, so if you really want to go for a 3rd tier magic attack like Bufudyne, you can. There is a really cool way you can make your units stronger, and that way is sub-personas. Persona Fusion is back in Tactica, but it's different than how it works in the main series. Personas are much easier to come by in this game. You'll often get them just by completing chapters. And Persona Fusion in general is just a lot more simplified. At the end of my first playthrough, I got 67% of all the personas in the Persona Compendium, which is definitely a lot more than my between 35 and 45% I got in base Persona 5. Personas, though, work differently in this game. Every character, including Joker, can only use their 1st tier persona, but to make up for this, every character can equip what is called a sub-persona. This can be equipped to any character's persona, and it will give them positive buffs to things like health and SP, as well as giving them a unique skill that persona wouldn't be able to use otherwise. You can also use Persona Fusion to make a weapon for a character. These weapons are pretty unique, and a lot of them can't be made in shops, which is a pretty handy tool because, oh my goodness, the shop is so expensive. Money is pretty hard to come by in this game, so when every single weapon is ridiculously expensive for the time you are offered it, and new guns that are more expensive and more powerful come in after every single dungeon, it makes it such a hassle to buy guns, especially when you can only really buy 2 or 3 of the most powerful guns when you get access to them. I mean, you are able to buy a few more as you progress through the dungeon storyline, but by then you're already pretty close to the next dungeon, so you're pretty much only getting the most powerful weapon for a couple maps. And you can't just spend all your money on the weapons shop, as the Persona Compendium also requires money to use. And this probably is a nitpick, but I find it really weird that the only way you can sell old weapons is by going to the Velvet Room. There's no way to sell weapons in the actual shop, so it's a bit of a hassle for no real reason. Luckily, the only thing you can buy in shops is guns, as there is no item shop or a way to buy upgraded melee weapons. So luckily the issue isn't as big of a deal as it probably could have been. And that's pretty much all the ways you can customize your units in Tactica. This is probably my favorite aspect about the game, as I really like the implementation of sub-personas. And again, I really appreciate the simplicity of it all. And I think it complements the game quite nicely. To be honest, the story of Persona 5 Tactica isn't that good. I don't think me saying that is any big grand revelation, as it isn't a mainline game. It's a spin-off. It'd be very weird if Atlus did a lot of work on making the story good for a game that less people are going to play. That being said, I wouldn't really call the story bad either. There's some stuff in here I actually do like. I appreciate that the story is basically about one person. Everything that happens in the story is centered around a new character, Toshiro, a meek politician who is shackled by forces in his life. Every single villain in the game is a direct representation of the forces holding Toshiro down from bringing justice to the world. He started off fighting the shadow form of his fiancée, a person who's only getting married to him to have the power associated with being married to a politician. You then fight the representation of his manipulative father, who is trying to make Toshiro a political puppet. You then go up against the shadow of Toshiro himself, because actions he did in the past against a corrupt schoolteacher almost led to the death of a close friend. After those first 3 bosses, Toshiro finally awakens to his persona. He's ready for the final challenge against the godlike figure that put him in the Phantom Thieves in this version of the metaverse. And then after managing to conquer all of his personal problems and escape the metaverse, Toshiro makes grand steps in order to become a better politician. And that's basically a base synopsis of the entire story. What I really appreciate about it is that it focuses entirely on one person. Every new character and event that happens in the story is all related to Toshiro, and I think the game did a pretty good job of writing him. He's nowhere near my favorites in the series, but I think he's a very solid character. And I really appreciate that Phantom Thieves take a back seat in this game. They're pretty much just firepower for Toshiro's goals. And since we have several spin-offs and base Persona 5 where they're the focus, I really appreciate this. Now, like I said at the beginning, the story isn't great. It is very predictable. I pretty much could predict the entire rest of the game in the first act, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Basically, all of the villains weren't that strong, especially the final boss, who was pretty much a ripoff of Yeldabaoth, who was already a pretty lame villain to begin with. I do have to admit, though, that this game does have one pretty good arc, that being the third dungeon where you learn a lot more about Toshiro's past. The flashback storyline with Toshiro and his high school friend Eri was the most engaging part of the story. Overall, I think the story is very serviceable. There is some stuff I can bring up with some plot details being a little convoluted, but I don't think it's right for me to do that. It's honestly much better than I expected. Based on what I've heard about previous Persona spin-off, I was expecting poor characterization for the Phantom Thieves that made them very one-note. But I'm really happy I did not get that. They definitely aren't as deep as they are in base Persona 5, but I don't really think that matters in this game, especially after we already have the main game to get to know them better. And with that, I think I've exhausted everything I could possibly say about this game. Persona 5 Tactica was a fun game. I can at the very least say that. With that being said though, I also would not say this is an experience that's going to stay with me for a long time. The gameplay was good and the story was alright, but beyond that, there really isn't anything remarkable or terrible about this game. It's just alright. Don't take that as a bad thing though, as it's a spin-off game. Of course, it's not going to be the most amazing, life-changing experience of all time. It's for Persona fans. If you're a Persona fan, you will probably enjoy this. If you are a fan of strategy games, you will probably enjoy this. I am a fan of both, so of course I liked Persona 5 Tactica. Now regardless of any negative criticism I have against this game, I can't say I disliked playing it. Now, the price being $60, especially with the Persona 5 Royal re-release from last year also being priced at $60, with having much more bang for your buck and a more worthwhile experience in general, I can't really get behind the price that I paid for it, but that's neither here nor there, as I don't really want to focus on price when I'm critiquing video games, as I'd much rather focus on the content within the games, rather than the price it's asking for. I just thought I'd bring it up because I find it a little weird. And with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and Tactica itself. I probably won't make another video on Tactica, but if I do buy the DLC at some time, I might make a follow-up. If you are a fan of the channel and want to know what my next video will be, I will be making a full retrospective on Fire Emblem 3 Houses. I've made several videos on 3 Houses in the past, but I want this to be my complete thoughts, as I haven't really had the chance to give them, at least to the degree I want. I plan to have that out in January, but depending on how large the project is, I might have to push it back to February. So I hope you look forward to that. I will see you then.